Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about Transcendentalists. So Transcendentalism is a 19th century American school of thought which combines the respect for nature and self-sufficiency with elements of Unitarianism and German Romanticism. Emerson is the primary writer of this movement, which began in Massachusetts in the early 1800s and became organized into a group in the 1830s. It's related to Unitarianism, and I've put a link here so that if you want to find out more information about Unitarianism, what it is, what they stand for, you can click on that link and learn about Unitarianism beliefs. It is said to have come about from a discussion between the New Light theologians and the Old Light theologians. The New Light theologians believed that religion should focus on an emotional experience, whereas Old Light theologians claimed religion should be based on reason. The Old Lights were known as liberal Christians and then renamed Unitarians. Unitarians are defined by the belief that there was no Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost as in traditional Christian belief. They also believed that Jesus Christ was mortal. The Transcendentalists split from the Unitarians over their emphasis on rationality and embraced German Romanticism's more spiritual tenets. Transcendentalists advocated the idea of a personal knowledge of God, believing that no intermediary was needed for spiritual insight. They embraced idealism, focusing on nature and opposing materialism. By the 1830s, literature began to appear that bound the Transcendentalist ideas together in a cohesive way and marked the beginning of a more organized movement. So the Transcendentalist Club, or the Transcendental Club, was created. In 1836, 4 Harvard graduates, Frederick Henry Hodge, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Unitarian ministers George Ripley and George Putnam met at Willard's Hall in Cambridge to discuss letters exchanged between Emerson and Hodge. Over the next 4 years, the group, along with many other ministers, intellectuals, writers, and reformers, would meet over 30 times. The only rule the meetings adhered to was that no one would be allowed to attend if their presence prevented the group from discussing a topic. Emerson's essay, Nature, was presented at presents the transcendental philosophy as it formed at the club meetings, and he presented it first to everyone at the club before he presented it to the world. The group stopped meeting in 1840 but became involved in Transcendentalist member and feminist Margaret Fuller's publication, The Dial. So Ralph Waldo Emerson, he lived from 1803 to 1882, so he lived to be a pretty old man. He is a poet, philosopher, and essayist. He was the son of a clergyman. He graduated from Harvard in 1821 and attended Harvard School of Divinity. He became an ordained minister in the Unitarian Church in 1829. So he was well educated in religion and philosophy. In 1829, he married Ellen Tucker, but she died shortly thereafter of tuberculosis in 1831. Her death added to his crisis of faith, and shortly after her death, he resigned from the ministry. He traveled to Europe in 1832, where he meets romantic figures in Carlyle, Coleridge, and Wordsworth. He moves to Concord, Massachusetts in 1834, and there he marries Lydia Jackson in 1835. Emerson travels around giving lectures about his philosophy. He begins publishing his lectures, most notably Nature, in 1836 and The American Scholar in 1837. His lectures claim that God is not remote and unknowable, and that believers can understand God and themselves by looking into their own souls and through feeling a connection to nature. These lectures catapult him into becoming the key literary figure in the American Transcendentalist movement. In the 1840s, he founded and co-edited The Dial with Margaret Fuller. In 1841 and 1844, he published 2 volumes of essays, including Self-Reliance, Friendship, and Experience, which are some of his most famous pieces. He also, in the 40s, has 4 children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. His later work favored a more balanced life between nonconformity and societal concerns. He continues to lecture throughout the 1860s, and in the 1870s he is referred to as the Sage of Concord and still continues to publish. His beliefs and idealism greatly influenced his protege Henry David Thoreau as well as Walt Whitman. His writings today are considered an invaluable window into understanding 19th century American literature, religion, and thought. On to his protege, Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau was born in 1817 and he died in 1862, so his life was significantly shorter than Emerson. He was born in Concord, Massachusetts. He studied Greek, Latin, and German at Harvard. After graduating in 1837, he struggled with figuring out what he should do next. He went into the field of education, but struggled with that, so he goes to work for his father as a pencil maker. Thoreau and Emerson, after college, Thoreau meets Emerson, and Emerson becomes his mentor. Emerson introduces Thoreau to Transcendentalism. Emerson uses his influence to get Thoreau a job at the Dial, where Thoreau writes primarily about wildlife in Massachusetts. When the Dial closes, Emerson offers Thoreau land, and it is there that Thoreau builds a small cabin and writes his most famous work, Walden, or Life in the Woods. Walden. This is a picture of Walden's Pond. It's a contemporary picture, obviously. Published in 1854, the book was only mildly successful. It isn't until much later that it becomes an important piece of transcendental literature. Even today, Walden is considered an inspiration for naturalists, environmentalists, and writers. Thoreau's later years. While living at Walden Pond, he refuses to pay a poll tax and is arrested. After this, he writes on civil disobedience, which makes the case that one should follow one's own conscience rather than blindly following laws and government policies. After Walden, he works as the caretaker to Emerson's property while Emerson tours Europe. He suffers from tuberculosis and eventually dies of it in 1862. And then finally, his legacy. Because of his staunch beliefs of the importance of civil disobedience and a nonviolent approach to political and social resistance, he influenced both Mohandas Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. So you can see that Thoreau's philosophies and his beliefs were really instrumental in what we believe today as Americans. And when you're thinking about Emerson and Thoreau, they were sort of the very first, I'm going to call them hippies. They were the very first tree huggers that really talk about the importance of nature, of relating to nature, of experiencing nature, and how that brings you closer to God and gives you a much better understanding of yourself and your world. And it is through Thoreau that we get the importance of nonviolent protest and ways that you can work against the system without being violent or hurtful. So these guys are our first American hippies, and they were quite influential. So happy reading. If you have questions, let me know, and I will talk to you again soon.